Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast, the podcast dedicated to simplifying the commercial real estate industry for the masses. Each week, we sit down with industry experts to dissect the many facets of commercial real estate and extract valuable lessons you can apply to your business. Whether you're a new or seasoned business owner or investor, the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast will be your go-to resource for all your commercial real estate needs. Now, here are your hosts, Raphael and Jeff Walston.
Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast. I'm your host, Raphael here with my co-host, Jeff Walston. How's it going, Jeff?
It's going great. How about you, Raphael?
Can't complain. I've been reading a great book that was actually recommended to me by Chad Griffiths, one of our podcast guests in the past. So really, really great insights, and it's been very, very inspirational. So
that's good to hear. That's great to hear. I am excited for this podcast coming up. Someone that I've utilized, and got a wealth of knowledge from, Todd Dawalt. He is just on such a mission out there to help construction business owners and their teams to maximize profits, eliminate chaos, and take their business to the next level. I'm telling you, he's the founder and host of the Construction Leading Edge podcast. If you haven't heard about that or even listened to it, I would definitely tell you to listen. There's a lot of knowledge, a lot of great people that come on his podcast. And it's one of the highest rated and longest running podcasts in the construction industry. You guys are going to hear today is, his 20 plus years in the construction industry, from bathroom remodels to high rises, how he built companies from $7 million to upwards to $50 million. This guy has been around the industry in every sector. And I'm really, really excited for you guys to hear this podcast today.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a common theme that you're going to learn through this podcast is communication. This guy is phenomenal at effectively communicating with the people downstream and then building systems in order to make sure that they're able to scale effectively. So that's some of the top things that I got from the podcast. I'm sure you guys will get a ton more out of it. He really is a wealth of knowledge, and I wish we could have talked to him for 4 more hours, because that's how much value we were getting from the podcast episode. So without further ado, let's dive into the episode. Hey, Todd, great to see you. I know we've been correspondents for a few weeks now, but it's really great to see you on the podcast. I know you have had correspondence with Jeff in the past, and I think Jeff has also worked with you in the past. So again, we're really appreciative of you stopping by.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So just to start out, what we love to do is just get a feel for who you are and what you do. So really just tell us a little bit about yourself, like what got you into your business, and just kind of take it from there.
Yeah. So what I do is I work with construction business owners from all over the world to help them eliminate chaos. That's what I would say if I had to boil it down. And I'm known as the systems guy. So my job is eliminate chaos, eliminate profit leads with systems. So I have a podcast called the Construction Leading Edge podcast. It's been around. It just crossed the 7-year anniversary of the podcast. I've created some master classes on improving bottom line profitability. I just rolled out a construction financial master class. So I create online courses. I've done live events like the one where I met Jeff at a few years ago. Haven't been able to do much of that. I tried desperately to do a live event late 2020, but just didn't happen. And I also have a coaching business. So I work directly with construction business owners, commercial, residential, GCs, subcontractors, to help them essentially get where they want to be, whether that's grow their business, improve profitability, get into a position where they can sell the company, whatever it is, help them develop their strategic plan, and then work backwards from there to actually make it happen. So that's what I do in a nutshell.
That's awesome. And I've listened to a few of the Construction Leading Edge podcasts. I think one of the more recent ones you had was related to a project that's going on in Texas. So you couldn't disclose what it was, but I think most people knew after hearing it for a little bit what exactly it was. But
it was a thinly veiled, I think it was a 1.2 million square foot building for North America's largest e-commerce or online sales. So it's not really hard to figure out. I'm guessing it's Amazon.
Yeah.
But I'm not
Never know.
you just never know. There could be
Yeah.
could be somebody bigger.
Yeah.
I don't know, but
You never know.
yeah.
So how did you get started in, say, your construction background? I know that you have a vast resume, you would say, in your background, but can you tell us a little bit about your construction background?
Sure. So I started off right out of college with a civil engineering degree. I actually ignored some of the best advice that I ever received. I was working for a small business owner in Lexington, Kentucky, and I'd worked for him over the summer, and he said, Todd, you don't want to go work for a big company, because I had an offer from a big general contractor. Don't go to work for a big company because your impact is going to be diluted. There's not going to be anybody in that company who can shake your hand and say, you made me $500,000 this year. And again, that was some of the best advice I ever ignored. So I did go to work for that big company. I was there for about 5 years, managed commercial projects, did some cool stuff. Great company. But I just had this entrepreneurial itch. And I thought, you know what, I'll go start my own business. I'm making these guys all this money. I could go do this stuff. And what I realized was I was pretty good. I was really good at the building part, but I was ill prepared for the business side. Did not understand the financial side whatsoever, did not understand the importance of cash flow, of selling, the people side, the importance of being willing to confront employees. Just, I sucked at everything but the building part. And I completely underestimated how important all that other stuff was. So long story short, I learned a lot of lessons there, made a lot of mistakes. I had to shut that business down because of this perfect storm that I got hit with, a lot of which was due to my ignorance at the time. And then since then, I was brought in to turn around and manage a sewer rehab company, and grew that company from around 4 million in revenue up to 11 million, grew it from 10 or 12 employees up to 50 employees. I've been an owner's rep for quite a bit of my career, probably 8 years, managing projects for Procter & Gamble, Duke Energy. I worked for a couple of different real estate development companies. The biggest project I was the owner's rep on was a $70 million construction project for an 18-story senior living community. So I've spent quite a bit of time on the operations side. I was a business owner for a while, and then I was the owner's rep on the real estate side for a while. And then about 7 years ago, I started the podcast. I decided we needed to get better as an industry when it came to the people side, leadership, and we were so fragmented, and really still are so fragmented. There are so many great people with so many great ideas, but there was no good way to share ideas. So that's what I went about doing. And long story short, now it's what I do full time.
Yeah, and you do a great job at it. I can contest to joining your group and meeting you in person. And I learned a tremendous amount in such a short time. So if anyone out there is listening and owns a construction business, I would highly, highly recommend Todd and go through his program. It helped me out a lot just in a short time. So I can only imagine if you spent a year with Todd here, what he would do with the company and stuff. So you've done a great job for the industry. And I'm still listening to your podcast today. So keep up all the great work.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I think as I share this pie graph with people at the beginning of live events that I would do, and I would draw a circle, and I would split it up into 3 quarters and then 1 quarter. And I'll point to the 25% quarter of the pie and say, this is the value you're going to get out of listening to me talk.
Yeah.
That's it. And it's probably pretty aggressive to say, 25% of the value is from being in the room listening to me talk. So people are like, well, what am I doing here then? What's the rest of it? And the rest of it is the combination of getting out of the dumpster fire that is your business and the day-to-day stuff you deal with, and then getting in with a group of other peers, of other people who are dealing with the same thing as you, and the community components and the networking and the sharing of ideas. That's really where the magic happens, because most of the stuff I say probably gets forgotten, but those relationships with other people, those just don't go away. So yeah, but I appreciate the kind words.
And I'll even say, and I'm not necessarily in the construction side. I'm actually in commercial real estate as a broker and as an agent. And I'll say, even in that side of things, when you start building your business and you start getting really enveloped in the day-to-day operations of your business, it's hard to really get an understanding of you get kind of lost in the weeds, where you're just kind of going from one fire to another and trying to deal with everything else without stopping back and saying, hey, what's going on? How can I better approach the situation so that it becomes more scalable? And I can actually go through the process of, having that time freedom. And I know you talk about that a lot in your podcast, where, if you're an independent business owner and you have 10 employees and you have a ton of revenue, that's great. But what's your life look like? If you're working 100 hours a week, every single week for 20 years, it's not sustainable, and it's just not a great quality of life. So.
Yep, absolutely. And that's one of the things that what I found across the board. There are a handful of things that business owners want, and maybe everybody, but business owners specifically, because that's who I work with: more time, more freedom, more peace of mind, and then more money, like in that order: freedom, time, peace of mind, and then money. That's what people really want. And yeah, if your business is giving you the money, but it's constant stress and you don't have the freedom, you're working 6 or 7 days a week, then you need to do something different, unless that's what you want to do. But yeah, I think the key is figure out what you want. What does your ideal lifestyle look like? What's your plan? It comes down to that question. What do you want? What do you want? Yeah. And then let's go fashion a business, design a business that'll get you there.
Definitely. No, of course. So now let's take a time machine back to when you first got started in the construction business. I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about maybe the first construction project you did, whether that's with a larger corporation or maybe when you first ventured out on your own, whichever you think would be most appropriate. And then kind of some of the lessons you learned about that experience, because I definitely will have some people that are listening to the podcast that are just getting started and they kind of want to get a feel for what that first projects look like.
Yeah, the very first project I worked on was 1997. It was a new library for a small liberal arts school in Kentucky. Ground up construction. At that time, it was about $8 million. Beautiful, architecturally dense facility. And I came out of school with an engineering degree, and I quickly realized that very little of what I learned in college was applicable. Just period. Yeah. Nobody asked me about, I didn't have to do any fourth order differential equations. But what I really learned, I think, and one of the things I learned that set me up for success early in my career was ask a lot of questions. If I didn't know anything, so it's not like I couldn't even pretend that I knew what some of the tradesmen were doing. I didn't know how these guys worked. I didn't understand how systems went together. So I had to ask a lot of questions, and I learned that by asking a lot of questions, people were much more likely to listen to me. So I was out there at one point leading a crew of carpenters operating, and at one point I was operating like a superintendent, where I had the steel erector, the mason, a crew of carpenters that I was guiding. I was leading 30, 40, 50 people, most of whom were probably twice my age. And I realized my job was to ask questions and then clear obstacles for them, find out what they needed help with, make sure everybody was coordinating with each other, and then clear obstacles. And the best way I could get people to follow me would be to solve problems for them. If they saw me as a valuable resource, they knew I was a good guy and I had their best interest in mind, they would do what needed to be done. They would listen to me. And contrast that with another guy on our team who took a slightly different approach, which was I'm the general contractor, I'm the whatever, you have to listen to me, look at the color of my hard hat, that kind of stuff, telling people what to do. It just didn't work whatsoever. So that was one of the biggest lessons I think that set me up for success, was ask questions, solve problems, and people will work with you.
Definitely. And I appreciate you saying that, especially coming from it as a younger professional. Because again, if you try to just tell people what to do that have twice your experience, I mean, I'm assuming most of them would have been like, who's this guy? Like, it doesn't matter, you know? And I actually have a similar, not necessarily similar background. I was an engineer in college. I got in the software business, and I wasn't very familiar with any type of software products prior to actually getting into the profession. And that same logic applied. It's just asking his questions and then actually trying to solve something, and not just becoming dependent on someone for answers. It's getting out there and, you know, trying this out and then trying this approach. And then if it doesn't work, then you go back and say, okay, this is what I did. This is the result. Where am I going wrong? And that's at least what I learned a lot in that space. And I'm sure it was similar in your space as well. So that's awesome.
Yeah. And I think it would be helpful for everybody to develop a software development mindset, because it has to be systematic, and you have to start with the end in mind and work backwards. You can't just charge ahead and then kind of course correct as you go. You have to, I think that mindset, at least for me, the mindset I've developed from what little bit of web development and building online courses and things like that, it forces a different way of thinking that's really helpful in a lot of parts of life.
Absolutely. I know you were talking about some of the challenges that you had with the company that you work for, but what are some of the challenges that you face to scale like your own business that you've overcome? And
I think probably the biggest challenge that I've overcome, and my biggest challenge, is myself. It's mindset. That's what I've found is there are a lot of great people out there who have great ideas and they're brilliant, but they just shoot themselves in the foot. They have all of these, they are their own worst enemy. And when things go really well, they sabotage themselves, or when things don't go well, they sabotage themselves and they just take themselves out of the game. It's like, maybe you've seen some really good athletes, super talented. Well, a good example, my son is a basketball player. He plays college basketball now, but I noticed something about one of the teams he was on, and frankly, a lot of teams, if they get up by 20 points, then they lose discipline, they start screwing around, and they lose focus, and they start playing a different game. And this team would give away huge leads constantly. They didn't know how to play with a lead. And then on the flip side, if they got down by 15 or 20 points, they just quit and they just imploded on themselves. And I think a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs, are like this. And it all comes down to mindset. You have to be disciplined. You have to be able to manage your emotions. You have to stay focused. You're going to go through adversity. If you haven't been hit with adversity yet, good for you, but it's coming at some point. And you have to know how to manage that. And that's the biggest obstacle that I've overcome, is just not quitting, quite frankly. Yeah, I believe that I'm a testament that if you just keep failing forward, you'll win eventually. I haven't done anything spectacular. I just didn't quit. Maybe I was too dumb. Actually, I did quit once. I did put the podcast on the shelf for about 6 months. For a while, I was like, screw this, it's not working. I quit. And what's funny was a few months after I said that, I happened to look at the stats because it was still available. And the downloads went up. There was this hockey stick of downloads. I'm like, okay. I've decided, you know what, this is what I need to do. I just deep down knew this is what I need to do. And I just can't quit. I have to persevere. That's the ability to pass the persistence test, I think is the key, especially for entrepreneurs, but even I think for anything you want to accomplish, you've got to be willing and able to pass the persistence test.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that kind of plays itself to the same approach that you took with a long game in mind, right? When you have an idea of where you want to be in life, and then you kind of work backwards from there, it makes those little hurdles that you have to jump through a little bit more tolerable in the short term. But if you're always just looking in the now and not thinking about how this particular obstacle is going to set you up for what you're going to want to do in the rest of your life, then that is when you lose focus and you get disheartened, because now it's like, oh man, it's just another thing I have to deal with. Whereas if you take the long approach and say, this is just an obstacle in the way of me reaching my 10-year, 15-year, 20-year goal, and then you just work backwards from there, I feel like that's just a much more healthy approach, and an approach that long-term will benefit you in any business you're in. So,
yeah, absolutely. I think that the key is to detach from short-term results. And I think this is something I picked up from Nick Saban, the college football coach. He had this thing he called trust the process. And he said, if you trust the process, the scoreboard will take care of itself. So stop looking at the results, like that basketball team. They would look at the scoreboard and say, oh, we can take it easy. Or they would look at the scoreboard if they were down and say, oh, this is impossible, we might as well quit. And the scoreboard was determining, like the short-term results they were looking at that were in front of them determined how they played in that moment. And I think we have to just completely detach from short-term results, play the long game, as you said. And when you do that, you say, okay, that didn't work. And that was a bad week. It was a bad day, bad month, bad project, bad client, bad contract, but whatever the case was, that was bad, but I'm still going to be okay. I'm going to be able to ride this out because I'm not attached to these short-term results.
Going back to, I guess, those who are just starting out in the business, I think especially those who maybe have a little bit of experience, but they're really just going out on their own and trying to source opportunities, essentially. What recommendations do you have for people as far as what's the best way to source opportunities that are appropriate for what you're trying to do? And then another thing is to know if you can handle it, right? Because I'm assuming, depending on your level of experience, I mean, taking on a $10 million project right out of the gate is probably not appropriate for what you're trying to do. But if you have that experience and you know how to build the systems or whatever else, maybe it is. But maybe if you could elaborate a little bit on that, I think that would be appropriate.
Yeah, this is a question I get quite often. People will contact me, set up a call, and they'll tell me, I'm planning on starting a business. And I'll give a prime example. A guy a few years ago contacted me and said, I'm planning on starting a crane rental business wherever he was located. And when I asked him, well, why a crane rental business? That's interesting. It's really capital intensive. It seems kind of risky. It's a pretty crowded market. And he said, well, can you guess what he's been doing for the last 20 years? What do you think he's done for the last 20 years?
Crane rentals.
Crane rentals. Maybe even a crane operator. But that's what he knew. So there's an old saying, to a man with a hammer, every problem is a nail. So there are two fundamentally different business development approaches. One is what I call the guy with a hammer approach, which is that guy. He has a specific hammer that fits in his hand. He's been swinging it for 1 year, 5 years, 20 years. So he's out looking for nails to drive because that's all he can do. Similarly, people who are commercial project managers, they want to start a business. What do you think they gravitate toward? Being a commercial general contractor, which is an incredibly crowded market in a lot of places, very competitive. Or they want to go into government work, which is extremely crowded. So that is the guy or gal with a hammer in search of a nail approach, which can work. But the approach I like better is to say, I'm a person with access to a lot of tools. I can solve problems. So let's start by determining, let's do some experiments. Let's come up with some hypotheses of the type of work that we can do, that we can be the best at, that there's a demand for, and is profitable. And let's go test that. Let's go talk to some people out there in the world. Let's go find some problems to solve and be problem focused rather than like type of work focused. Let's go look for problems to solve. And what I found is that works much better because it takes the blinders off. If you're going into business looking to rent cranes or be a commercial general contractor, let's take that commercial general contractor, for example. If you're in a crowded market, you want to start this business, and that's all you know, then you may talk to project owners and they'll say, you know what, we have an incumbent provider we've worked with for the last several years. They're doing a great job. Man, if we could find a good drywall contractor, that would be amazing. Or we really need somebody who can help us with concrete repairs at our facility. And that person's like, yeah, that's interesting, but that's not my wheelhouse. They might talk to half a dozen people who say, we don't need a general contractor, but we need these two things. And with the blinders on, they'll miss those opportunities. But with the other approach, you go talk to business owners, facility managers, whoever your folks might be, or even better yet, referral partners. Ask what problems are you having? Then you find problems and you start to build a business around that. And then you don't have to go generate demand. You just have to go find problems. So that's my advice. If you're just getting started, go find problems. You may be able to make money from people that you were thinking you might have to compete with. So instead of competing with big general contractors, go find out what they need help with. What problems do they have that you can solve and be profitable in?
That's really great advice for people, just especially someone that's starting out. I mean, you definitely have to take your blinders off to look around and see what the market that you're in, right? To what the problem is and what you can do to provide a solution. So particularly someone starting out, what would you tell someone who's looking for reliable and effective subcontractors for projects? Say someone who's a GC or that's just looking for their subcontractors.
Yeah, that's a tough one right now. Good subcontractors they're hard to find. I wish I had a silver bullet for that.
Yeah.
But my advice would be, well, you have to think about it from a marketing standpoint. You might think, these are subcontractors. Why would I market to subcontractors?
Yeah.
Well, because they're the customer now. You're trying to get, they have an option. They can work for whoever they want to if they're good. And you want them to pay attention to you. So you have to think about, what are they interested in? Well, subcontractors are interested in general contractors who help them be profitable, which means jobs are ready, jobs are well coordinated, well planned. They're also interested in getting paid, period, and getting paid on time. And they're looking for people who will send them a steady flow of good projects. So think of yourself as supporting your subcontractors, right? This is kind of a mindset shift, but 20, 25 years ago, it might have been the case that subcontractors needed general contractors more than the other way around. And the GCs had all the power, and the menial little subcontractors would beg for scraps at the table. It's not like that anymore. It's a level playing field, and you have to market to these subcontractors and network. You really just have to network and find out who the good ones are, develop relationships. It's a long game. This is something that takes a while. Go to events, meet people, be strategic. You can drive around and see who's on good projects, who's working on good projects, make a note of it, contact them, go take them out to lunch. It really comes down to relationships, one-on-one, person-to-person relationships. And one of the things you can do is, one of the best things I've found, whether it's to develop relationships with referral partners, like for example, if you're a general contractor and you want to grow the commercial side of your business or get into the commercial side of the business, commercial real estate brokers are my favorite referral partner source. And I've got a resource here that we'll talk about toward the end, but there's some interesting ways you can do this. You can build relationships with brokers. You can do the same thing with subcontractors, and connect with them on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, wherever they're at, like their stuff, share their stuff, promote their stuff, build relationships with them, and then call them, talk to them, take them out to lunch, whatever it takes, and then do all of that before you actually need something from them. And that will distance you from a lot of the competition. So those are a couple of things. Some of those are a little bit out of the box, but you have to build your subcontractor and trade base just like a college basketball team recruits players. You need to do it a couple of years before you think you need it.
Yeah, that's phenomenal advice. And I'll come at from the brokerage perspective, where we get reached out to by, a bunch of people, especially the bankers. Like, I get talked to bankers, reach out to me all the time. They want to grab lunch and coffee and whatever else, and similar things. And I imagine the construction space as well, where, you reach out to someone, grab lunch with them. And if you have an immediate need right then that can come off as being, a little bit, it doesn't go off well with individuals. But if you show a genuine interest in getting to know someone and develop a relationship over time, that's really business in general. That's business 101, where, now I get to an understanding of who you are. Maybe I'd learn a little bit about what projects you're doing, and, I see some of your work, and then I'm like, okay, well, now that next time I have a commercial client, maybe they're looking to, build out a space, and they're like, hey, who do you know that can do this work? I'll be like, hey, I got a friend who, I know very well, and he's done some great work, and he's done this and this and this, because you've already built a relationship with them. I mean, that could be phenomenal. And I've worked with Jeff. Well, we've tried to work together a few times where I've recommended a few of my clients over to Jeff just as an opportunity for him to get in and potentially perform a build out. So I 100% agree with that assessment. Yeah.
And so many times the business development approach for general contractors is pick up the phone. Hey, this is Todd. What do you have that I can bid on? You got anything coming out? What's out there? What can I help you with right now? Because I'm slow. And then when you're busy and that broker calls you and you don't call them back, it's just completely backwards. So you have to nurture relationships, build trust. It really, I learned this. I was actually in business development for about 6 months, selling to contractors. It was a really tough situation. The parent company that I was underneath had me selling product to people who competed with the parent company. Okay. Like, some people it just didn't reconcile at all. Like, you're part of this big company that sues its competition, and you want me to buy stuff from you? That doesn't make sense. But what I learned was it's about relationships. If I could take somebody out for dinner, get to know them, literally get to know them, and meaningfully get to know them. And actually, if they could figure out, and they got the sense that I genuinely cared and I was trying to help them and I was interested in them, then we had a relationship, we had a connection. And if there was ever an opportunity, at least they would remember me and I would have a shot. And it's a long game. It's really all about relationships.
And if you have 100 relationships like that, and every year maybe there's 10 that pop up, that's 10 opportunities for you to take advantage of. So that's awesome advice. So, and this is more on the general contracting side, I would imagine, or even on the subcontracting side, I would imagine. But let's say that you are bidding on a project, right? And you do receive the project. How are some of the ways that you can, maximize the profit from this particular opportunity? Because again, and the reason I reference the general contracting side is because there's so many moving pieces, in particular, if there's a large project that, you could have some bleed on. And at the end of the day, if you're not careful about how you assess that financial obligation, you could run the risk of potentially even losing money. So if you have any strategies in particular that you could share, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, this is something I could talk about for hours. A couple of keys that I've found. There's a tendency that you want to thinking trap that everybody falls into. And I'll share an example. When I was working for a real estate developer, this was 2015, 2016, we landed a project to build a new office building for Valvoline. And the RFP came out from the broker. We won a basic office building, 140,000 square feet, roughly. And that's what they said they wanted. And so a developer was selected based on that. And then there was such a rush to get to the next step, like whatever was next. So at the beginning, it was, we got to pick a developer. So let's just throw together some half-assed RFP, not based on what we really need, and get a developer. And then the next big push was, well, we got to get a contractor on board. We got to get a contract signed. So that means we have to put bid documents out, and there was this push to get to the next step. But nobody was thinking, all right, we're going to build a building, and then at some point they're going to move in. 350 people are going to move into this building. Where are they going to eat? How big does the fitness center need to be? How big are the cubicles? How much meeting space do we need to have? There wasn't a program. There was such an emphasis on the next step. Nobody was looking out to the end and working backwards. So the key is, like, the biggest risk to a project at the front end is the lack of planning, period. Whether it's on the owner's side, where they're just trying to rush through and get a lease signed. I've seen this a lot, put this ridiculously vague, poorly thought out RFP out on the street, get a lease signed, and then start figuring out all the details, then figure out what they actually need. I've seen this so many times. When I was building out, I built a bunch of distribution centers, and we would get RFPs that came in from brokers for 30,000 square foot of build out. And they would sign a lease based on that. Well, no program behind it, none of the planning that needed to happen. So the key is slow down up front, understand that all of the key to success on any project, whether it's getting the building right so it actually works, and then from the contractor side, making it profitable, happens on the front end before any work starts. So there's this graph that I show people that has a couple of lines. The first line is it shows the opportunity for change as time goes on. And when you get started, the opportunity for change is really high. You can change whatever you want because they're just lines on paper. But that opportunity for change goes down as time goes on. And then as time goes on, the cost to change goes up exponentially. And the reason this drives me to tell people, slow your project down if you have to, do all the planning you need to on the front end, make sure you have your program right, make sure that you understand the operation of how the space is going to work, make sure that the project that somebody has given you actually solves the problem. I've seen this so many times. A project will advance to a certain point and it doesn't even solve the problem that it was intended for. And that means slowing down, redesign, change orders, all of this stuff. So it's better to go slow. There's a statement from Jocko Willink. It's a Navy SEAL statement that slow is smooth, smooth is fast, therefore slow is fast. So go slow on the front end, plan the project out, make sure that it solves the problem, that it meets the business need. If you're the owner or the owner's rep or the engineer or the architect, make sure it's actually going to meet their need. If you're the contractor, then slow down and plan that project. Make sure that all the questions are answered and really focus on nailing the handoff. This is where projects fall down on the construction side, the handoff from the office to the field, because the pre-construction team or the estimators or the business development folks will work on a deal for weeks, months, maybe even years. They get a contract signed, and then not enough of that information gets handed off to the people in the field who are actually going to build it. And that ends up in costly changes, delays, uncomfortable conversations from the client that say things like, but I told you, or I thought we talked about, and that's where things fall down. So go slow, overinvest in planning on the front end, nail the handoff.
I would 100% agree with you. As a commercial GC, there's so many times that I've been with a customer client that they did not plan. They knew kind of what they wanted, but they didn't know the 1 through 100 steps to get there. Mm-hmm. And obviously the job turned into a nightmare. There was so many change orders, so many times that It got so bad that we had to take a week off. There was at one particular project that we just had to stop. I told them, we all need to take a break. We'll stop the job and you guys go sit down. Family owned business. So I wanted them to all sit down, come up with a plan for the most part, and then come back to me. And I tell you, just in that week of just sitting down and planning and talking to each other, they came back with a plan. And from that point on, the project was smooth. There was no headaches. There was no hiccups, road bumps. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you.
Going back to that Valvoline project, I mentioned the RFP came out.
Yeah.
There was a big push to get to the next step, whatever the next step was. The next big push was to get the core and shell contract bid out to the GCs.
Yeah.
And it was like 3 months of design effort that was going to be fast tracked, which I can tell you as an owner's rep, as a contractor, fast track projects are a disaster. All right. It seems like a good idea because you get started fast, but resist the urge to fast track. Because here's what happened. We were 2 months into a 3-month design project, really pushing to get bid documents out. And then they did a little bit of programming and they said, oh, guys, I know we said we needed 140,000 square feet. And I know your design documents are like 80% complete, but we really need 165,000 square feet. Ooh. Can you change it for us and still meet the bid date? So then that sets off a whole domino effect of screw up changes. And it was a constant churn of changes because even once we got that issue settled, every time the leadership walked through the building, they made changes. And it got to the point where this project was so bogged down in changes. There were so many loose ends. It was this giant hairball of change. And it was barely delivered on time, and it was a disaster. The finished product was beautiful, fantastic building. Most of the people would never know. If you look at it, you think, wow, this just looks great. It's amazing. But it cost a lot of extra money. It caused a lot of heartache, and it could have been a lot simpler if the project had been slowed down on the front end and more planning was done. What's the problem we're trying to solve? Let's make sure we're really clear on that. There's this old saying, Albert Einstein said, if I have an hour to solve a problem, I'll spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes solving it. But there's this human nature. So we want to get started. Yeah, we got a contract. Let's get out there and get started. Let's start turning dirt, making some sawdust and smoke. And that is, it's human nature, but it's a thinking trap. You're better off to slow down, finish the project well, rather than be in a hurry to get it started quickly.
For sure. And I'll even add something real quick is just on the software development side, I was in the software consulting business. So we would go in and implement software systems for different government agencies. And so when we used to get on site, we go through the requirements gathering process where we're going through and trying to identify exactly what they want, exactly what they need. And you would be so surprised with all the random things that they think they needed. And all of a sudden, all you do is probe a little bit and say, why do you need that? Why do you need this? Why do you need that? And then actually put them in a room and try to say, do you really need this, or would this work better? And then all of a sudden it starts all falling in line. And that's why it's so deliberate. We were so deliberate for the first 3-4 months of being on site without even touching anything like coding or anything. We would just make sure that everything was ready to go so that when we went in our development phase, it was quick. It was like, okay, now we know what we need to do. Here are all the specs. Let's go in and develop. And at that point, it's really just making sure that everything works as according to plan. And obviously there's testing involved and everything else, but probably similar to a construction project where if you have that time on the front end and dedicate time to actually make sure that you're doing the appropriate thing, which is not always obvious. That's why probing's so important. I think that's some great advice for sure.
Yeah. And one of the things that I learned and that I did, if we had this, let's say a tenant came along and they leased up a distribution center and they needed some office space and some other tenant improvements. The first thing I would do is, number one, decide who's the steering team for this project. There might be a purchasing manager who they just want to get it off their desk, but ultimately you're going to need somebody to make decisions, review and approve designs, review shop drawings and submittals, things like that. So who are the decision makers, and establish a steering team for the project. Go ahead and get schedule meetings on the calendar, however long you think you're going to need these people for, and then establish a project charter, which is clearly defining this is the measuring stick we're going to use to measure this project when we're done. This is the problem it needs to solve. This is how many butts and seats we're going to have. This is how many dock doors we need. This is the temperature that we need. What are the specs? What are the performance specs for this project? And this is what we're going to design to. This is the measuring stick we're going to check the design against, what we're going to check the bid documents against, what we're going to check the finished product against, and get everybody to agree that this is what winning looks like. This is the charter that we're going to check back to. That step forces people to think further than the next step. And I love what you said. When somebody says they need something, really? Why? And does that really need to be part of this project? And I remember I used to manage projects for Procter & Gamble. And every time we touched an existing building, the facility management people came out of the woodwork. Oh, we need a new lighting control system, a new HVAC. And like, hold on now, we're just like painting the lobby.
Yeah.
We're not putting new revolvers in, we're not putting revolving doors and a whole new security system. But when a project came along, it was like, well, we got to step up to the plate and swing for the fence. And so the project charter and a steering team and what you brought up is great advice. What do you really need? And then the beauty of that steering team is that gets everybody in the room together. So it's not you trying to negotiate with the individual stakeholders who are in a different company, or a client company in some cases, which they'll put you in that situation if you're not careful. They will absolutely make you the bad guy and do whatever they can. But that's on the front end, getting the decision-making process and that measuring stick setup is really key.
Completely agree with that. So if you're a general contractor and you're getting the bids in, they're coming in or a project to bid, and what would you say, how could you effectively estimate the construction cost for like a redevelopment of a building or even ground up construction? For me personally, here recently, I know everyone's busy. If you're good, you're busy. Great subcontractors out there, even contractors, everyone's busy. So they're going to take a while to respond to the bid date, the deadlines. But what would you say for you, or how you tell people to effectively estimate?
So is this a tenant improvement or like a commercial fit out inside an existing building?
Yeah, let's do a redevelopment. So exterior, interior, building's already there. So we're trying to do a renovation to the exterior and interior.
And do we have fully baked bid documents?
Yeah, let's go with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the typical situation is you have some kind of document, some kind of schematic design.
Yeah.
So here's what I would say. There are two major risks to a project up front. Number one is the lack of planning we talked about. And this next one's going to surprise a lot of people. But the second one is the free estimate. The second biggest risk to the project is the free estimate, because here's what happens. So many times, as you mentioned, everybody's busy. And then a set of documents comes through and it finally makes it to the top of the stack for the whole gamut of estimators: electrical, metal stud drywall, plumbing, HVAC, all these people finally look at it. And then they're like, well, shit, this is crap. This is not right.
Yeah.
This will never work. So do you think they're going to spend a whole lot of time trying to solve your questions and answer them? No, they're going to roll them back up or flip to the next document and go to the next job on the board, because they're really busy and it's not their problem.
Yeah.
So here's my advice. My advice would be, if you're a general contractor, and I've done this with several general contractors. Well, I'll give you an actual example. I had a call with a guy in Atlanta. He was a commercial broker, and he had just started up a general contracting firm. And a client that had an art gallery came to him and said, we want to do something to our 4,000 square foot art gallery. Maybe they had schematic design. I don't even know that they had much, but it was interior fit out. They wanted to make some changes. Like, that's all they knew. And he was prepared to go down this path of, well, I'll meet with you and prepare schematic designs and then do budgeting and value engineering and more budgeting and the value engineering and bidding and all of this stuff for free. And I said, pause. You need to get them to sign a pre-construction agreement. It is in everybody's best interest to pay for the necessary planning upfront on this project, because those bid documents, even if they are fully baked, according to the architect, a lot of the selections haven't been made. Final material selections have not been made. Availability is unknown. The design, if every time I've had a mechanical engineer prepare an HVAC design in the last 5 years, I've thrown it out because they don't design stuff with current pricing in mind. So my number one piece of advice, if somebody gave you a set of documents to bid on, I would tell them at this point in the project, the two biggest risks to your project are the lack of planning. And I would show them this graph that shows how costs go up exponentially and the opportunity for change goes down exponentially. And the number two risk is the free estimate, because there's a lot of stuff that's missing here. I have two options at this point in the game. I can run through this, give you a free bid. It's going to be based on a bunch of allowances, guesses, and I'm either going to bake in insurance policies, basically contingencies to cover it, or I'm going to have these back doors that I'm going to keep open, and I'm going to come back and hit you with change orders, because there are big gaps in the schedule. And there's so many times when, or not in the schedule, but in the scope, there's so many times when a contractor is in a position where they have to either bid what's drawn or bid what they need. And that's a damned if you do, damned if you don't type situation. Because if you bid what they really need, then you may not get the job because you're higher. And if you bid what they really shown on the drawings, and then you get to this contract sign and you come back with a change order and they say, well, why didn't you tell me? And you're stuck saying, well, I had to bid the documents. And the answer is to get the contractor involved before we finalize the design, go through a pre-construction services agreement, scrub the design, make all the selections, fill in all the gaps, then sign a contract based on that. Do all the planning before the contract is signed, as opposed to the way it's typically done, which is get a contractor on board, and then we'll figure all this stuff out and fight about it at the end.
I mean, that's a great answer. I know I went through some of that early on 15 years ago, learning that if someone didn't plan for it and you didn't have all the right documents, and then you see all the missing pieces and go into them prior to bidding the job is always your best bet. And especially if you do get a pre-construction agreement, that's definitely great advice. So
many people are reluctant. Contractors say, I could never do that. Why would they ever pay for it? And I can tell you it's happening. I've worked with dozens of contractors who've done it. When I was an owner's rep, one time I was willing to pay $10,000 for a site work budget number on a large distribution project, because it was worth it to me, because I could spend $10,000 to get a budget, go revise my design before it's complete. It might save me 50 or 100 grand. So getting the right information up front, from the right feedback from a contractor up front during the design process is absolutely huge. And anybody that takes a project from inception all the way through design without getting the people who know how this thing is going to go together, without getting the contractors involved, you're really missing out on an opportunity.
And I will even say that's a phenomenal idea, especially when you sit down with a client, you show them the graph, you explain why this is the way we should approach it, because again, it's going to save them money and ultimately shorten the timeline of the project. And long term, it's better for all parties if you, like you said, take the time to be able to go through that whole process. It is a value proposition that you're offering the client, and I imagine the vast majority of people don't do that. So you'll definitely even stand out.
Yeah. And you mentioned time. This is a big deal because when you're dealing with a business, right? Businesses are there to make money. They're turning days into dollars. Maybe they're paying rent, but chances are the revenue that they're missing out on because their project is delayed per day is much more than their rent per day, right? So I would go to a business owner and let's say they're a restaurant or whatever the case may be. Let's just use a restaurant. I would ask them, so how much profit is one day worth to you? And they'll have a number. Hopefully they have a number. And then, okay, if this project gets delayed by 2 weeks for a variety of reasons, that means it's going to cost you like direct cost this much, plus staffing cost, plus rent. So let's spend a little bit of money up front before you commit to the lease, before we pull the trigger on this thing, and save you time, give you a better experience, save you money on the front end, and let's focus on a successful completion, a quick finish rather than a quick start. And I can tell you there's no better way to do a project than that.
Awesome. That's some great advice. So obviously you've had success in the construction space in your own business life. So if you could tell us a little bit, why did you decide to transition now when you're now working with really helping construction companies and business owners, attain that freedom that they desire? Can you kind of explain what the logic was for that transition?
The only thing I can say is this is what I'm supposed to do. And trust me, that itch to run a construction company or start a construction company, it's there and it pops up every once in a while, but I can either help one company grow like I did from 2011 to 2014. I can have one company solve its cash flow problems, go from $4 to $11 million in revenue, double, triple profit margins, eliminate chaos. I can do that for one company, or I could do that for hundreds. And I feel like it's my responsibility to help as many as possible. So yeah, this is what I'm called to do. That's what I finally came to terms with, this is what I'm here for. And I love seeing people succeed. I love helping business owners set a target, focus, work through things, work through adversity, hit their target, take long vacations, go deer hunting at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Wednesday if they want to, which was impossible a year before. That's what I love doing.
Yeah, and you can tell the passion you have just through all the content you produce. I had the pleasure of listening to quite a few of your podcast episodes prior to actually engaging with you, and you could just tell that you really care about helping those individuals improve their lot in life, really. And I'm in the same mindset where we just try to provide as much good content and really help for people, because all it takes is one idea. All it takes is one person saying something the right way that can just trigger that thought process in you and say, wow, I never thought of it that way. I never approached it that way. And so, obviously we all appreciate what you do on a regular basis. And obviously this has been super helpful so far. So.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I've listened to and read authors like Tim Ferriss, who I highly recommend, Dave Ramsey, a lot of people who've been really instrumental in my life. And really two things I thought, if I could have one person avoid what I went through in my business and avoid the mistakes and the resulting financial crisis and stress on myself and my wife and my family that took a long time to work through, if I could help one person get through that, then that's worthwhile. And if I could do a fraction of what Tim Ferriss or Dave Ramsey has done, if I could have any kind of impact like that for other people, then I think I would be pretty happy about that.
You said you read quite a few books, and speaking of that, what do you think out of all the books you read, it was the most impactful for you, for your life?
That's an easy one. It's
Okay.
not really it's not a traditional business book. It's old, and it's a little bit out there. And I would say this is a case of when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And this book may not be right for everybody, but the most pivotal book for me was Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
Yeah.
It's old. It was written in the 30s or 40s.
Yeah.
He rubbed elbows with the Vanderbilts and Andrew Carnegie and folks like that. But that book changed everything for me.
Oh, it's a phenomenal book. And I think one of the big things about that book that's so profound is that mindset, that mindset change. And I mean, all the books that really have made an impact in my life have modified my mindset in some capacity. So obviously that's one that gets recommended a lot, is Think and Grow Rich. So if you haven't checked that out, it's definitely worth the read, and even reread, because it is that profound.
Yeah, it's not a book you want to read like a typical book where you just blow through and read as much as you can. You're better off to read one section, one chapter a day, or one chapter period, and then really figure that out. Take the actions that he says, get those things down, then go to the next chapter, and then read through the whole book, and then come back. I've told people, you're better off if you only read. There's a few years ago, it was really popular to read 52 books a year, one book a day, or some stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, you can't implement that much information. You're better off to read one book a year and implement a fraction of that stuff and actually see it show up in your life than to read a book a day.
1000% agree with you. I hear people talk about, I read a couple books a week, and it's, again, like you said, it's you can't implement that amount of information. I've reread multiple books before that have been extremely profound. I probably read them 6, 7, 8 times, because I'm like, okay, let me think back to this particular part of the book. How can I implement this into my, life or business or whatever? So I agree with you 100%. If you have a book that's that profound to you, reread it multiple times and really, really digest what it's trying to tell you and try to implement that in your life. So that's awesome. So now to kind of round out everything, one of the things we love to do and really offers resources to our listeners is what we have something called the CRE treasure chest, which is a repository of resources that we have our speakers contribute to our website that people can access, and really it'll teach them about the many facets of commercial real estate. So just wanted to ask, what do you have to contribute today?
Yeah, there are two things. One is a download, and I call it my Systematize Your Business Development Strategy. It's an execution plan, and I touched on it a little bit, but my number one business development strategy is to build your network of referral partners. So if you are a general contractor listening to this and you want to do commercial work, you want to get started, or you want to get into a nice part of the commercial construction business, this guide will help you step by step develop relationships with your ideal referral partner. So first of all, it will help you identify your ideal referral partner, and then it'll give you a step-by-step process you can use to connect with them, build some relationship, build some rapport, get them to know you, like you a little bit, then actually have that phone call. So it's a step-by-step process you can use. It's really baked around using LinkedIn, because it's a great place to find business folks, especially brokers. But you can use it, frankly, you could use this approach and this framework regardless of what type of work you're doing. Maybe you want to connect with architects, interior designers, pool service companies, I don't know, but the framework is good and in place. And I'll make that available. The other thing is, if you want to get paid for estimates, if you're a general contractor and or any kind of contractor, you're thinking, I like the idea of getting paid for estimates, but what do I say? Like, what do I actually say? What are the words that need to come out of my mouth to get somebody to write a check for me to do an estimate? Then I'll give you a link. You can go to buildermasterclass.com/script. And you can get a free training video there, and I'll give you some questions you can actually say. These are the questions that my clients are using. Questions they're asking prospects that are getting them to say, yeah, that makes sense. I'll pay you for an estimate. And I'm not talking about like $50, $100. I have clients I have one client named Chris Miller who told me back in mid-January, he said, I've collected $8,300 in pre-construction fees in the last 2 weeks. Another guy collected $10,000 in pre-construction fees in a month, the first month of doing this. So it's an absolute game changer. And it's actually my number one piece of advice for builders, remodelers, light commercial general contractors. It won't work on big commercial projects, and it probably won't work if you're a subcontractor. But if you're doing light commercial remodeling, light commercial ground up construction, or residential work, it's my number one tip.
It sounds like valuable resources. So we really do appreciate you contributing those.
Yeah, absolutely. So how can everyone get a hold of you, Todd? I know that you got quite a few websites in your podcast, and how would you like everyone to learn more about you and to get a hold of you? And
there's a couple places to go. Number one is, since you're listening to a podcast, you can go check out the Construction Leading Edge podcast. You may just be able to search construction, and you'll see the Construction Leading Edge podcast. There are 204 episodes out there right now. It's a great place full of resources. You can go to buildermasterclass.com. And I have a lot of resources there dealing with change orders, customer communication, whatever else I have available at the time. And if you want to get in touch with me directly, if you're a business owner and you're like, I got to put some systems in place, I need to nail down my strategy, I got to get my stuff together, then you can go to constructionleadingedge.com. That's my homepage. And there's a button there you can hit that says schedule a call. And if you own a business and you want some help working through some issues, setting your strategy, setting some goals, I'd love to chat with you.
And I'll contribute all those to the show notes below. So if you guys want to check it out, feel free to check out the show notes. If you're watching on YouTube as well, we'll be dropping it in the description below. So go definitely check that out. And I will say that his podcast is phenomenal. Definitely highly recommend checking out the podcast. So
I will tell all the construction, even business owners out there, from a guy who used Todd as a resource. He's definitely helped me. So you got to reach out to this guy. Knowledge is profound, and he could definitely help you out and put systems in place for you guys. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, Todd, thanks again for stopping by. We really do appreciate everything you do, and we really wish you the best of luck in your venture going forward. And I guess we'll be in contact at some point.
Sounds great.
All right.
Thanks, guys. I enjoyed it.
See you guys.
Thank you. Appreciate it.